Hi, everyone. I'm Nina. I have been posting on YouTube since like 2008, 2009. I haven't posted in like 4 years, I don't think. So, welcome to my channel. Can't really say welcome back to anyone because I haven't posted in 4 years, so I don't think anyone is tuning in that used to tune in. I wanted to make something today that was like the kind of stuff that I like to watch, so I was like, let me do some sort of deep dive video. I really like to watch long form content now. I feel like it kind of has helped my attention span get a little bit better. So today I wanted to talk about how my opinion, I think that everyone is confused. They think that Brat Summer was our generation's like roaring 20s, but I'm coming with some facts and receipts that I think prove otherwise. Also, before I get started, I just wanted to say I have notes here. So you'll see me reading a lot, and it's because I don't know everything there is to know about the 1920s, and I don't know everything there is to know about the 2000s off the top of my head. So took several days of researching and also writing down. So that's why I have a notebook. You'll see me reading. It's this notebook, Brat Notebook. Also, I'm enjoying some White Claws today. Not sponsored, obviously, because I haven't posted in 4 years. So what would they be sponsoring? So I've heard a lot of people refer to Brat Summer as our roaring 20s. I think that that's incorrect. I don't think that the roaring 20s were Brat Summer. I also think that would be a little bit depressing. Not because I didn't enjoy Brat Summer, because obviously I did. Comparing 1 year to like a whole decade is that's kind of depressing. But I mean, I can see where you would think that because things go at such a rapid pace now, like trends cycle so fast, like things happen in politics and the media and everything so fast these days. So like I can see where you would think that, but I do disagree. And before I go any further, I just want to make it clear that I certainly don't think the 1920s was a golden age for every individual. Nobody was throwing Gatsby-style parties in Arkansas, where I am now. It was actually a really difficult time financially for farmers due to overproduction and plummeting prices. And the government wasn't really intervening or providing much relief. And of course, we can't ignore the still ever-present racism in America. At the time, the Jim Crow laws were still in effect in most states, and that was going on up until the 1960s, which was not that long ago, and that is very horrifying. There was also something I learned when researching for this video, and I don't actually know if I'm pronouncing it correctly, but I will spell it on the screen here for you so you can look it up. It's called peonage, which was falsely imprisoning African American citizens and then leasing them out for free or very, very, very low pay, dangerous work. And that would be in like factories, plantations, mines, etc. I just wanted to give y'all those kind of basic, very basic facts about the time so that we'd all be on the same page, just because certain time periods are really glazed up and made out to be like so wonderful and, you know, party all the time and lovely for everyone, but they were not wonderful for everyone, and we shouldn't ignore that. And that is actually the reason I believe that people have had this trouble identifying what our 21st century, like roaring 20s equivalent is, because I think that not in retrospect, but in everyone's mind, what we think of as the roaring 20s is like the Great Gatsby movie. You know what I mean? I know for me, I love that movie. So for a long time, I also considered the 20s to be like kind of a time of relief after World War I, and a time of fun, and a time that everyone must have been just, you know, maybe they weren't doing drugs, maybe they weren't partying, but I assumed that it was at least like not a time of struggle. And before I end my opening statement, I just want to say that this is my opinion, and you might disagree, and that's totally okay. But I just wanted to make it known, it's just my opinion. There will be, like, obviously facts that are presented, but it's all something that, you know, future historians 100 years from now, just like we're 100 years out from the 1920s, they'll have to look at that in retrospect of everything, if it is truly a time period that compares. With that being said, hear me out. The 2000s was our roaring 20s. Let me take a drink. I have a second one here, just in case. So in short, in like very short, a lot of shit happened in the 1920s. I have a list here. Let's read it. Just before the 1920s, women got the right to vote. So, you know, that would have been in the 1920s that they actually got to act on that right. And the sale of alcohol was made illegal. Well, okay, the sale, production, and transportation of alcohol was made illegal, not the consumption. So we had the first nationwide radio broadcasts, silent films transitioned to talkies, mass production of cars, and I'm assuming that they also were kind of made more affordable since they were like being mass produced. The first transatlantic phone call was made, home appliances were improved and starting to become more affordable. The arts in general, dance, jazz music specifically for the 1920s, movies, poetry, books, it was all on the come up. People were enjoying the arts at a very high rate. And jazz music, let me talk about that for just a moment. Jazz music had been around for a very long time before this. Not, you know, like millions of years or anything, but a very long time before us white folk started enjoying it. So don't get it twisted. Even though jazz music was enjoyed by everybody during the 1920s, because it was just such a new, you know, fun sound, it was originated by African American people. And it originated in New Orleans, actually. And again, I think that was because radio got to be more popular. And so everybody was kind of bonding and listening to the same type of things across the country. Other things that happened in the 20s were drugs. So the most popular drugs we had were alcohol, cocaine, heroin. Other opioids were also very popular, heroin being the most popular. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that, so I might bleep it. But H was the most popular of the opioids. These things were being consumed at an alarming rate and in public. So people, you know, now you could say that, like, not now, well, actually now, yeah. Whenever you're at the club and it's maybe like a cool happening club, you might see a group of people go to the bathroom and you might wonder like what they're doing. And sometimes they're just going to the bathroom. They're just having a little kiki in the bathroom time. But sometimes they're doing coke or something else. You never know. In the 1920s, they were just doing it on the dance floor. And that's happened in other decades, you know, where there were like more private clubs like Studio 51. The claw is getting me, okay? Studio 54, private kind of places like that were more like elite people. Those were the kind of places that you could just like do coke on the floor and on the dance floor and nobody's going to say anything. But, you know, now it's kind of like, there are cops right outside, babes. Like, maybe take it to the bathroom. I don't know. Also, with the 1920s, we, of course, have to talk about flappers, their style and body type and diets. So I just want to give a trigger warning right here, and I will put on the screen, like, what time you can skip to if you don't want to hear about body type and diets. So, okay, so flappers. The sought-after body type for women in the 1920s, because unfortunately there is not a time in history where women weren't expected to all fit in an unnatural box made by men, was basically rail thin. few curves, flat chests. They really wanted their clothes to just kind of hang on the body like a mannequin, you know what I mean? Like a model. Their style of clothes was very low cut, short dresses like above the knee, so all the better for dancing. Drop waists. They liked sleeveless garments, stockings rolled below the knee, bobbed hair or like chin length hair. Very bold makeup, smoky eyes, dramatic brows and red lips. And hats and headbands were also really popular. The diet for these ladies is shocking. It would consist of things like raw veggies, oranges, grapefruits, toast, eggs, and cigarettes. There was actually a whole diet just called like the cigarette diet that was a published diet, like in magazines it was published. So that's crazy. Along with the rise of celebrity, I believe, in film and, with magazines being easier accessible, movies being more accessible, you're seeing a lot more of these like ideal people. In your head, it's ideal people. And because they're the stars, they're these rich and famous, beautiful people. I believe that with the rise of that, women wanted to look like them because Hollywood and, fashion magazines, the media kind of does determine a bit like what the style of the new age that you're in is. And I think that also along with that, seeing those pictures more often and everything, men feel like that's what they want their women to look like too, unfortunately, even though they look like that. I'm a lesbian, by the way, so it's just kind of like, I can't believe the audacity of them. And also, as far as the diet, starlets and, different actresses and whatnot, their diets, which, were probably decided by their managers or like producers at wherever they worked at, whatever, if they worked at MGM or, I don't know, Lionsgate, wherever they worked, their diets were probably decided by someone who was not a dietitian. So they would talk to magazines, get interviewed by magazines, and then magazines would publish their diets, these actresses' diets, as if it was a diet that you should follow, that women should follow. And so that's where we get fad diets from. That was actually like the start of fad diets, was the 1920s, because, all this media is so readily available now, and that's where the flapper diet came from, is like fad dieting. And so, unfortunately, we had to start that somewhere. So the 1920s really was a time of progress. It might not have been progress in the way that we see it, but it was a time of progress, good and bad. But the good and the bad, in my opinion, I can't say that enough, they were truly different sides of the same coin. So movies and magazines were a great way to entertain yourself and such a fun treat to like get to go see or get to buy or get to hear, but they planted a seed in everyone's head that's still there today. That because she looks like that in the movie or on the cover of a magazine, now I want to look like that. So I'll starve myself because I don't want to be seen as ugly or out of trend. In the 1920s, just before we had ended the war, the World War I, we got women the right to vote. The economy is going in the right direction. So we just kind of stopped fighting for progress. We're like, oh, we got all this great stuff. Now, I'm just assuming that our politicians are going to take care of it from here. They know what we want. We want progress. So have at it, guys. And then like we see time and time again, they're going to pull the rug out from under you. If you try to get progress pushed further, they are not going to do it unless you have your foot like on their hand and like forcing them to do something. They are not going to do anything for us. So that happened back then, just like it happens now. Yeah. we just kind of stopped fighting, and unfortunately, nationwide interest of progress, everybody just kind of died down on it, and nobody was super worried about it. At the beginning of the 1920s and right before the 1920s, our government really tried to lock in on controlling drug and alcohol consumption, but when there's a will, there's a way. And we were excited, like all this great stuff is happening. And we also, as humans, I think we hate authority. And so we wanted to fucking party. And in this era that felt so free, we did. And we partied ourselves right into the stock market crash of 1929, and then, followed by the Great Depression, where we see a rather sharp decline in recreational drug and alcohol consumption and an increase in the overall physical health in Americans, which, based on research, I have to assume it's because everyone was literally poor. They couldn't afford to indulge in the stuff that they enjoyed anymore, alcohol and drugs. So I guess that's sort of good. But, however, the suicide rate did increase during the Great Depression, which I totally get. Everyone was losing their jobs. It was super scary. I can imagine they couldn't afford to pay their bills. But honestly, the suicide rates didn't really have a huge impact on numbers, like the numbers of deaths we had each year. So the death rate was still technically down. So that's kind of the 1920s in a very small nutshell. We got the right to vote. We had a lot of technological advances. We were having a big old party, doing lots of drugs. There were some things that were happening that were bad, like racism and drug deaths. So let's move on to the 2000s. The decade started with the strange, made-up thought that all computer tech would fail due to coding issues. Okay, so it's kind of hard to explain because it seems so silly in retrospect. I guess, maybe I could kind of see it. I don't know if I would have believed it back then, but, maybe I would have kind of convinced myself that I believed it just to have, a little bit of fun. So everybody was freaked out because they thought that computers were going to start crashing because the way that dates were stored in our computer systems at the time, they were only by 2 digits for the years. So instead of entering into the computer 1996, you would just enter 96. And that was how all of our dates in computer systems were, I guess. People went crazy. They thought systems would fail, computers would malfunction and shut off, and it would result in nationwide, I'm sure they thought worldwide power outages, air travel disruptions, issues with banking. That would probably be the one that got me stressed out the most. The issues with banking. That's the only thing that could have hooked me into that conspiracy. Many even thought that there were going to be full-on nuclear disasters. I don't know if they thought maybe a nuclear bomb was set to go off at one date, but since the date was going to be messed up, a nuclear bomb is just going to go off or something whenever it hits 2000. I don't know. In reality, let's get back to it. 1999 to 2000, pre-New Year's, obviously, coders were working on the issues, and then nothing really came of it. I'm sure there were a few, maybe small businesses or something that just, didn't worry about it too much or, didn't know what to do. I'm sure that maybe some of their systems had issues, but all in all, the world did not end. It was fine. 9/11 also happened, which, if you don't know, that's insane. But it was the 2001 terrorist attack where planes were flown into the World Trade Center buildings and the Pentagon. And I believe that there was a 4th plane that was crashed into a field in maybe Pennsylvania. Just under 3,000 people were killed, which is insane. I don't think that everybody understands the scope of how large the World Trade Centers were. They were incredibly, like, they had multiple businesses in both buildings. Like, there were restaurants, there were, the actual World Trade Center, like, workers, there were shops. I want to say that there were even maybe, like, floors that were leased out by other businesses. I'm not 100% sure on that, but I just want you to understand, like, the magnitude of this, that these buildings were huge. 9/11 was a really, really big tragedy for the nation. There's a lot of conspiracies about what caused 9/11. We're not going to get into that. It's not the point of the video. I'm not even going to give them the time of day because I think it's really it's disrespectful to the situation. There are plenty of videos on that, probably very well researched. Like, go for it if you want to hear about them. But this was a really huge tragedy that, while it brought on a lot of solidarity within our country, because everybody was traumatized. Everybody wanted to kind of huddle together and be close, While that was great, it also caused a lot of racism. I know that people still feel that today, and really probably all people of color, especially right after the attacks. I think that people who are racist, they don't actually even care or like clock like what race you are. They just see that you are a different color than them, and they are like, that's bad. You know what I mean? So they're racist to you, and I'm so sorry. I wish that there was something that I could do to change that. I hate that there is always bad with the good. Like, why couldn't this have just been a time for solidarity within the nation? People banding together and understanding that Americans, American citizens didn't do this. Why are you attacking American citizens just because of the color of their skin? I mean, it's an ongoing issue. It's always been a thing. It's just, it makes me want to pull my hair out. I can't even imagine being a person of color around this time. So that's my tangent on that. Let's get into some of the fun stuff that happened in the 2000s. Technological advances in the 2000s were, we got camera phones. Cell phones were like really popular in the 2000s, and then they started getting camera phones, USB flash drives, we got Bluetooth, iPods, video game consoles we'd literally like never dreamed of before. Like handhelds that were capable of more stuff than we had ever thought would even be possible. And we got the Nintendo Wii, which was marketed as the gaming console that'll get your grandma to play video games. And it definitely did. It did mine. We had the PlayStation 3 that came out in the 2000s, which had like amazing graphics. I never had one. I've never been a gamer. I think it's my eyesight. I am nearsighted or farsighted. I don't really know what the difference. I can see up close. I can't see far away. So video games weren't really for me, especially at the time. I was more of a DS girl, because we also got the Nintendo DS in the 2000s, and we got the PlayStation Portable, the PSP, which had like huge titles also that were just like unheard of. You know what I mean? Like unheard of being able to have like a handheld that would be able to play this big of a game. And then we also had the Xbox 360. Some other big technological things that happened in the 2000s were that social media launched. And this really made an impact on people's relationships with one another in quite an interesting way. You didn't just have to wait for what was going to come to the movie theaters or what was going to come on television. You got to make it yourself, or you got to like search for it. And if you couldn't find it one day, the next day probably someone had posted about it. If you were into music in 2003, you could join MySpace officially. where you could not only find and follow pages for like your known favorites, but you could also discover new smaller creators, and you could even post your own music for your friends to enjoy and maybe even get some like wider recognition. Some of our biggest modern names in the industry got discovered through MySpace. We had, I think like Lady Gaga, she was on MySpace and got discovered. Adele, Nicki Minaj. I know that Charlie XCX was also on MySpace. I don't know if she got like a record label for being on MySpace, but she was on there and she was posting. So super cool. MySpace really changed the music industry, the music scene forever. At the time, it was still kind of, this is a stepping stone to get to mainstream music industry, but it changed the music scene forever by introducing the possibility of the fact that you could produce your own music and you could get views and you could get listens on your own. You don't actually need a record label to push your album out. You can make it on your own and you can post about it and people might see it. Another big social media that has since fallen from grace, in my opinion, was Facebook in 2004. It was originally invite only, and it was used for new college students to connect before they got to campus. Some other notable social media platforms coming out at the time were Reddit, Twitter, 4chan, LinkedIn, and Pinterest. And one of the biggest and still extremely popular platforms from the time is YouTube, which launched in 2005, actually. This one opened a lot of doors for people who were posting. We know all about them. Fred, we had Jenna Marbles, Shane Dawson, a ton of others that I didn't watch. I was pretty much a Jenna Marbles, Fred. There were crazy cat videos on there. Just a big, like, amalgamation of a bunch of different content that, you know, you could literally find anything that you wanted on there. That's what it felt like anyways at the time. Some of the viral creators on there even got lucky enough to get into mainstream media. I mean, Fred, like I said, for instance, he went on to be like on iCarly and on like Hannah Montana, and then he had his own movies, and then I think he had his own show too. And I actually still watch him on YouTube. He's not Fred anymore, obviously, but I watch him and his brother Lucas and Jacob. And yeah, so it's just crazy. Like, you could really make like a lasting career on YouTube. Some other great progressive advancements made in the 2000s came after we nominated our first ever Black president, Barack Obama. And while I'm certain some losers out there thought it was the end of the world, there were amazing things to come from this. Like the Affordable Care Act. Even though y'all want to act like Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are different, they are not. And of course, just like with the 1920s, we can't talk about all the good and exciting without talking about the bad. So trigger warning again, we're going to be talking about some body image stuff. So I'll put again on the screen what the time you can skip to is if you don't want to hear that. The 2000s were a very hard time for women and girls to simply just exist. Popular styles at the time were mini skirts, low-waisted jeans, low-waisted sweats, low-waisted leggings, really every type of clothes you'd wear as like bottoms, they were low-waisted. We also had like crop tops, really tight tops, low cut, sleeveless tops, and this all correlated with diet culture and celebrity culture at the time. You know, we wanted to look like them innocently because, you know, every time, I mean, like I said, for the 1920s, celebrities kind of define what the look of the age is, and so we wanted to look like them. And unfortunately, their managers wanted them to look as skinny as physically possible. And in turn, we perpetuated that. Trashy fucking shitty magazines would publish articles shaming women for their normal bodies doing normal things. Things like going to the beach, out for a walk, going shopping, etc. And we would buy this shit up so we could join in on the pointing and laughing. All while the women whose bodies were being scrutinized most likely felt horribly humiliated. And we planted seeds in our own brain and in the brains of those around us that looking normal and being a normal weight was basically something to be scared of, and you should do everything in your power to stay skinny or get skinny so that you aren't subjected to that same humiliation you saw famous people getting. And here we are again with fad diets. That was a huge trend in the 2000s, and unfortunately a lot of women who had children would put their children on fad diets. And not only did fad diets infect adult brains and give them an ED, it also infected their brains enough for some of them to force their children to go on these diets, handing them single-handedly an ED. And I can't even imagine how. I mean, I feel like I'm so lucky to have been born in the year 2000 so that I was still little enough throughout, young enough throughout the 2000s that it didn't really register with me, and I feel very lucky to have not gone through that because it seems fucking brutal. Some popular fad diets at the time, just to give you an idea of what people were eating, were the Special K diet. So, like, just cereal, lean cuisine, slim fast, and the baby food diet. So, like, lean cuisine, if you don't know, is a microwavable meal, and they're fine. I mean, I've had, like, lean cuisine pizza, but it's mostly because they were $4, and my rent was, like, $1,300. Slim fast is a drink. I think that they maybe have bars, too. I don't know if they did in the 2000s, but I think it's, like, a meal replacement drink. So that sucks because eating is great. Baby food diet, just fucking eating baby food. So yeah, people were teaching themselves how to have an eating disorder, and they were also granting their children a taught eating disorder, or at the very least, giving their children disordered feelings around eating that a lot of people still struggle with. And I mean, it's not just a thought in my head that people still struggle with this. I see people say it. I hear my friends, people say it, that they still struggle with this. Like, this isn't the only decade that's done this. The 1920s started it. So drugs in the 2000s. I might have just wiped my eyebrow off. I don't know. Because I shave off the tails of my eyebrows, so I don't know. I might have just done that. Drugs in the 2000s. Drugs. The most popular drugs in the 2000s were alcohol, heroin, marijuana, cocaine, and methamphetamines/amphetamines, which I don't really know what the difference in that is. I thought that methamphetamine was just a different word for meth. I think that that is true, but I don't know what amphetamines are. So, drug use related deaths did reflect the fact that drugs got more popular in the 2000s, and I'll show you a chart here. There was a steady increase across the decade, peaking in 2006, and it seems the decline beyond 2006 was also steady through the end of the decade, spiking up just a little bit again in 2011, and then absolutely skyrocketing in the later 2010s and early 2020s, which I think, based on my own research and knowledge, is due to the fentanyl crisis that we are in and have been in since these spikes started. And I think that the decline that happened in the later 2010s after 2006 was due to the recession that we had in 2007/2008. Okay, so to wrap this up, I'm going to talk about the kind of direct comparison. I know I talked a little bit about it while we were talking, but this is like direct comparisons I'll give you. New forms of media output and consumption made heavy waves in our culture in both the 20s and the 2000s. We really bonded as a society, and I think that's why it seems so like romantic to look back on, like now people my age and younger really romanticize the 2000s, but like people who were young adults and teenagers in the 2000s, they know different. Although it is nice to look back on a simpler time as far as like technology and social media and things like that. People who lived through the 2000s know different, that there was a lot of bad with the good. Media in general is something that I think bonds a society, and that was happening in both the 20s and the 2000s in new ways that it had never really happened before. You know, in the 2000s, we had social media and different ways of consuming music and movies and all types of new content, videos on YouTube. In the 20s, we had radio, movies were becoming talkies, movie theaters were popping up everywhere, you know. We were able to have telephone conversations with people across the country now for the first time ever. Both decades had huge political moments, both leading into the decade and during it. So like in the 20s, we had women got the right to vote, the prohibition. In the 2000s, we had 9/11. We had Y2K, which was like weirdly made political. We also had Obama, our first black president. In the 20s, we had the Great Depression, and in the 2000s, we had the recession. And those kind of mirror each other almost exactly, with the Great Depression starting in 1929 and the recession starting in 2007, 2008. So we had almost the same amount of time in each decade. Both decades obviously ended in economic crisis, basically, which the 2000s, you could say it didn't technically end in economic crisis because the recession only lasted about 18 months. But if we're talking about like the grand scheme of things, it basically ended in economic crisis. The decades following both the 1920s and the 2000s were wrought with political turmoil. The 1930s really divided people in the U.S. as America was gearing up to enter World War II.
Editing Nina here. I completely misspoke whenever I was trying to quote this reference, so here it is for you to pause and read. Regarding the lead up to World War II.
In the years gearing up toward the U.S. entering World War II, which was in 1941, the country was divided greatly, and it was racism. Again, the usual stuff. You know what I'm saying? As disappointing as that is, for that to be the usual stuff. And of course, we all know what happened in the 2010s. We got a fucking loser in office who I won't even name. You all know who he is, and it's not Obama. But he has caused the country to divide so greatly that I don't know, honestly, if we will ever recover from this. I feel very hopeless about it. I feel like the only thing that's going to, and honestly, the thing that would relate the 2000s to the 1920s even more than it already is related would be if we got into fucking World War III in these next couple of years. That would almost line up exactly with the timeline, huh? I think that he's a fucking loser, and I just hope that YouTube stays meta free, and I hope that Elon Musk doesn't buy YouTube or like something like that. I hope that it just stays its own entity. So yeah, to wrap things up, to make my literal very last closing statement, I think the 2000s was our roaring 20s. And I know that it's kind of disappointing to think that you didn't get to live in such a fabulous time that would be comparable to the Roaring 20s, but just know that every time that is romanticized, I mean, there are people out there who even romanticize the 1950s, you know what I mean? But every single time is not as good as we look back on it. You know what I mean? It was never as good as how the movies make it seem like it was. If you're watching The Great Gatsby and you're like, God, I was born in the wrong generation. No, you weren't. The 1920s, it was not all peachy keen. there were, you know, expectations for women that are hard to live up to and were a struggle to live up to for the women that lived at the time. There were racial divides that, while we still have a lot of racial division issues, they were a lot more intense back then. And so yeah, I understand that, like, for the generation that I'm in, and for the people that are just a little bit younger than me, I can totally understand why you would be like saying that Brat Summer was our roaring 20s, but like, really, no. It's just kind of like a pocket of light in the middle of darkness. Unfortunately, you know, but that's how every time is. There's always good and bad. Do you think that, you know, during the entirety of World War II, nobody had a good time ever? You know what I mean? There were some families like that probably didn't have, you know, a son that was drafted, just like had a daughter. She was a teenager. She wasn't even like old enough to be on her own yet. They probably just had a regular family movie night on Friday and laughed and had a good old time like anybody else. There's always going to be pockets of light in the darkness, and that was one of them. Um Luckily, and I loved the fact that it brought so many people together and it made everybody feel so hopeful about the election in 2024. I hate how the election went, and I do, obviously, I believe in the results and I accept them. However, I do not think that this is what is going to be best for the country. So, yeah, I'm kind of getting off, but it's because I got these damn White Claws. In closing, I think that the 2000s was our roaring 20s. Yeah, subscribe if you want. I'm going to try to do more stuff like this. Drink a little on my day off. I'm going to have written a little script, have a little fun. Fun, but also venting, because I did vent to you guys about the stupid fucker president that we have. I won't even say his name. So if you want to go somewhere that never says that man's name, subscribe here. Bye.